Tell me about the show Starting Over.
Ever since we did The Real World, people had been asking, can you do The Real World as a daily show? Could you create something for daytime television or for syndication that would be like The Real World, but you'd actually produce 5 episodes a week? And we always said no, because The Real World, we shoot for 16, 17 weeks, and we make anywhere from 12 1-hours or 22 half-hours out of that material. And the story process is long and involved, and the editing takes a long time because you're having to find the story. And that just takes time. So for a show to be 5 days a week, it would have to have some structure to it to sort of guarantee that you'd have a beginning, a middle, and end to each episode. And at the time of one of the various writers' strikes, the networks put out the word that they were interested in more reality programming. I forget which writers' strike it was, or which, I'm not sure who was striking, but I just know that everybody was very worried about the fact that they didn't have their scripted programming. And we started talking about this idea of, well, how would you do The Real World for adults? How would you tell that next point in your lives? And we started talking about, well, what reason would there be for unrelated adults to be in the same environment, the same house? And we started talking about, well, a lot of people particularly women, sort of make early choices which basically sets their life in motion in a certain direction, and they don't have much chance to change the direction because they have kids or they have jobs, things. You rarely get to sort of do a mid-course correction. And so we started talking about, well, what if there were some adults who came together and there were life coaches, someone who could work with them to help them make the change in their lives? And so we started playing with that idea. And I guess the strike was settled because we didn't end up pitching the show to primetime television. And then I was in a meeting with King World Television with Scott Freeman, our head of development, and they said, once again, is there any way you could do a syndicated show like The Real World for us, something that we could sell in along with Oprah, because they were doing Oprah. If I had anybody who was going to syndicate a show for me, I would love to have King World, because having worked at local stations, I know they can get a show on the air. And so I don't know how it was. When they said that, I said, well, there's this idea we have for a show called Starting Over. And I basically, in the room, adapted to the fact that there would be these women. They would come. They would be in the house for a certain period of time. There would be these life coaches. Sort of laid out the show, and they said, we love this. And so, a day or two later, they called up and said, yeah, we want to do this. Let's do a presentation tape. Let's do something. So we made a tape for them, and they showed it to the King brothers, and they basically said, are you crazy? We would never do a show like this. I think at that time they were talking about doing a Roseanne Barr talk show or something. And, they just said, no, this is not us. Even though there were some people who were real fans of it in their sales department and in the development department, but the King brothers just didn't. No, it wasn't them. And so it went back in the drawer. And a few years later, a William Morris agent, who was one of the agents that represented us, Susie Unger, called me up and she said, I was just with Ed Wilson at NBC Universal Syndication, and a show has fallen out, and they need something in syndication, and I mentioned Starting Over, and he wants to hear the pitch. And so we got Starting Over out of the bottom drawer, and we went over there and we pitched out the show, and they basically bought it in the room. And they said, how soon can you take that presentation tape you had made for King World and reconfigure it to make it work for us because, we're not doing a pilot. You're just going to go straight on the air if we can sell this. And, of course, they had all the NBC owned and operated stations and some other ones that they were a big deal. So if Ed wanted to get a show on the air, he could pretty much get a show on the air. And so suddenly we found ourselves with, a commitment for a year's worth of starting over, 165 one-hour episodes. And so we had to figure out how the hell we were going to do that because basically we had to every day we shot had to be an episode. And so luckily, we had the life coaches so we could structure the day that certain women would be working on certain issues. They would give them, some kind of homework that they would have to do. We'd film the homework. We'd also have the interpersonal drama in the house. And we sort of came up with the scheme of how to do it. And it was challenging at first, but we got into a rhythm and we were able to knock out, the episodes on time, on budget, and we were fortunate enough to get to do 3 seasons of it, and it was a lot of fun. And it probably of all the people who have ever been on my reality shows, I think the women who were on that show were the most satisfied customers. I mean, they felt that this experience had been a godsend to them, that their lives had been improved. As a group, they loved being on the show, and our audience for that show were incredibly supportive, and it was their show. They cared about it, and and the show did really good demos. It never had a huge audience, but it had really good demos. And after 3 seasons, NBC decided they wanted to do some other things. But I've had conversations with them since then, and they still question their decision as to whether ending the show was the right thing or not, because those demos look pretty good in today's television.
It won a few Emmys, didn't it, along the way?
Yeah, it won. It was the first Emmy I had ever won for I guess. I don't know what it was for. It was for Best Nonfiction Show or something. I don't know. Yeah. And it won some editing Emmys. So it was very exciting to win an Emmy. And again, it was, we felt we were, making good television, but also telling important stories. And we were finding that the mostly female viewership was really relating to and being empowered by what they were seeing on the shows.
Was Mary Ellis's soap experience vital to doing kind of a grind of a schedule?
Yeah, I mean, Mary Ellis, because she had come out of daytime, the 5-day-a-week daytime, she had, some really good ideas about how we were going to structure this to make this show. But it was also the time when Mary Ellis was facing a personal battle in a reoccurrence of her breast cancer. And so during that first season of Starting Over, both Mary Ellis and Bonnie Bogart, who was one of our lead producers on the show, Bonnie was facing ovarian cancer. Mary Ellis was facing a recurrence of breast cancer. So it was a challenging time because it was really emotional for all of us dealing with that situation. And Mary Ellis was the kind of person who didn't like doing anything halfway. So she was really pushing herself to do as much as she could on the show. And at the same time, we were also shooting The Simple Life. And, that had its challenges. Sometimes when the girls weren't speaking to each other. And so a lot was going on. And Mary Ellis passed away, and Bonnie Bogart passed away halfway through the season of taping that first season of Starting Over. So it was a very challenging time.
How did her death affect you personally and also affect the company?
Well, for virtually the entire time Mary Ellis and I were partners, we shared the same office. And for the first probably 10 years of the company, we shared the same table. I was at one end of the table, she was at the other end, and people would just join us for meetings. When computers came about and email came about, Basically, our staff yelled at us and said we were checking our email too much. So we then got desks in the same room, and we had a conference table in the room. So our email was over at the desk, and so when we went to the conference table, we didn't have our computers with us, so we couldn't check our email. But the partnership worked so well because, and actually sharing the same office worked well because we could overhear each other's conversations, so we didn't have to take the time to fill in each other on what was going on as far as each of us and what we were steering. We also had this amazing ability to sort of run with whatever we each felt we were most passionate about. So there were certain shows that Mary Alice would take more of a leadership role on. There's certain shows that I would take more of a leadership role on. And, it's sort of amazing in the almost 17 years that we were together, we never had one argument. There was just such respect for each other and such an appreciation for what each of us brought to the picture that it was just an amazing relationship.
What would you say Mary Alice's legacy is in television?
Well, I think Mary Alice has a couple legacies. I mean, I think she was one of the real innovators of daytime soap. She was one of the first producers to take her shows on the road. She took some of her daytime soaps to Europe. She took them on cruises. She really got the show out of the studio and did some really interesting remotes. As far as reality TV, I think her legacy is somewhat the same of mine, which is The Real World, and it's sort of the influence it's had on what we now call reality television.
Do you have a favorite memory or story, anecdote about Mary Alice?
Wow. Mary Alice was, in addition to being, an incredibly talented storyteller, she was also a phenomenal businesswoman. And I think she sometimes used to drive Mark Itkin, our agent at William Morris, crazy because, he would be negotiating a deal for us and he would send over sort of where it stood and she would just basically say, this is not good enough. And she would just keep sending him back. I know this can be better. I know this can be better. Don't give in on this point. And, I think if you talk to him, he would just he loved her, but at the same time, she was maddeningly, persistent. Mm-hmm. And, but she was usually right. She usually read the situation very well and knew that we might be able to get something more. On the other side of that, she was very protective of the fact that we had created The Real World, and that when some of these other shows came along, like there was a show that was done for the WB called The Surreal World or Surreal Life or something. And it was actually put together by someone who had worked at Bunim Murray. And the agents basically wanted to marry him and us to do that show for the WB. And when we negotiated it, he wanted to have this created by credit, and Mary Alice said, no, it's basically, an evolution of what we did. They didn't create anything new. And so ultimately that deal fell apart, which ultimately was not a good business decision for us because they actually, with the WB, had ownership of the show. And so then later when it went to MTV, they still had ownership. And, it was Chris Abrego, and based on the strength of that show, he sold his company to Endemol for, over $100 million. So, we were too protective of the fact that, the idea that The Real World was this special thing that we had created. And in some ways we were protecting ourselves, but we were also concerned about MTV and would it be appropriate for us to be doing The Surreal Life on the WB, which was so clearly similar to The Real World.
Right. So tell me about The Simple Life. How did that idea come about?
The Simple Life. Mark Itkin, our agent at William Morris, said you should really think about some of the old sitcoms that were on the air, some of the landmark series, and is there a reality show that could be inspired by them? And so we went through the lists, and he even mentioned Green Acres. And we started playing with that idea, and we said, well, what would a reality version of Green Acres be? And we started playing, would you send a family? Who would you send? Would you send them to a farm where they're going to essentially it's their own farm? Or are they going to go sort of to a farm where there's already a family there so that you have some conflict and some energy out of that situation? Because again, it's a reality show. It's not a scripted show, so you can't script the conflict or the humor. You have to set up the situation that's going to result in that. And so we started playing with some ideas, and about the same time, Mark said, I think there could be some interest in this over at Fox. And so we went over and met with the folks over at Fox Studio, or specifically, we went over and met with Mike Darnell at the network and talked to him about this idea. And he said, well, it's interesting. Apparently, Fox Studio is playing with a similar idea. And so basically, we want to do it. Let's do it together, but you need to do it through 20th Century Fox. And we hated that because we preferred to do our own shows. We didn't feel we needed to be married to a network, because once you're married, they're going to control everything. They're going to control all the ancillary. They're going to control distribution. They're going to control all that. They're going to, all their interest charges and. And with a reality show, it's not like a scripted show. There aren't, to me, I don't think there's the justification for the overhead charges and all those charges that they put up against it, which ultimately means you rarely see any back end. Because with a reality show, it just doesn't have those kinds of costs. Anyway, but if we wanted to do the show, we had to do it with a studio. It was pretty clear. So we got together with the studio, and they were great people, Dana and Gary. And Brad Johnson was our executive, and he was a comedy executive. And we began working on some ideas, playing with some casting ideas. And at some point, someone said Paris Hilton. And we all started talking about how that could be perfect because, we want to get a young audience. And Paris, is basically this young woman who grew up in Beverly Hills. Her last name essentially tells it all. And, she's had a very privileged upbringing and has not experienced what a lot of people might have experienced between the two coasts. And so we met with Paris, and she was interested. And we then said, well, who are we going to send with her? And so we began interviewing all of her friends, including her sister. And, various people came in and were like, no, that's just not there. And then Nicole Richie walked in, sat down with Paris right in here, right where I'm sitting, and they sat together and they started telling stories of being at Buckley together and all the trouble they got into and all the things they did to the other girls. And we were just rolling with, everybody was just like hysterical. It was so funny. And Nicole had just such an amazing sense of humor, and paired with Paris, it was just, there was a chemistry, it was lightning in a bottle. And so we made we put that casting tape together, showed it to everybody at the studio, showed it to Mike Darnell, the head of Fox Alternative, and everybody agreed they were perfect. And so we went out to Canyon Country, which I don't think I've ever been to again, which is somewhere way out in the valley. And we had Paris and Nicole work at a dog grooming business for the day. We picked them up in a limo at her grandfather's house in Bel Air, and they went off to, after having, the servants serve them breakfast, they went off to Canyon Country with their little dog. And they had to work, and over the course of the day, they really screwed everything up. And they managed to lose one dog. I mean, and when people came in to collect their dogs, the interactions with the customers were hilarious. And it was great. And so we put together a little 7-minute tape, went back and showed it to the studio and to Mike Darnell, and everyone loved it, and they ordered the series. And then we sent out, I think, 5 different producers to 5 different states to look for the perfect farm. And we ultimately found this incredible family in Altus, Arkansas. And that's where we sent Paris and Nicole.
So when things got a little rough with those two, did it get rough for you too, as a producer?
It was challenging. The Simple Life was challenging because Paris and Nicole, at that time in their lives, were not used to doing a lot of work. And making a television show is work. We're on a schedule, and we've got to get everything done. And they would have days where, quite honestly, they didn't want to get out of bed. And we've got a crew sitting around. Or they would get into a fight and not want to talk to each other. And it wasn't like they needed the money. So, occasionally I found myself on the phone with Paris's parents or with Nicole's parents trying to, work out a solution to get it going again. So it was challenging. But it was, it was what they knew at the time. They were the same things that made them great television, made them challenging television to deal with from the production side. But it was, what we got on camera was great. And, it was a wonderful, wonderful show, and I'm very proud of those episodes. And the fact that we kept it going for 5 seasons, I think everyone deserved an award.
Now, at some point, Fox halted production, or it moved to E at some point.
Yes.
Did you know that it was going to have a life past Fox?
What happened was our champion, Gail Berman, left Fox. Peter Liguri came in, and for some reason, he didn't like the show. And it had been doing very well. The ratings were still very strong. I don't think it aired behind American Idol, and I don't think anything has ever held the American audience as well. But on his first or second day, Peter Liguri called me and basically said, "I hope this doesn't hurt our relationship, but I'm canceling the show." I actually didn't have a relationship with him, so I wasn't sure what relationship it was going to hurt. But it's his game. It's you as a producer. You learn that you can't control every situation, and you have to respect the decision of the network folks. And so I immediately called Gary and Dana and said, this show should not die. My old friend Lisa Berger at E, I think, would love this show. I also think there might be some interest at VH1. Let me call Brian Graydon. And, and within a few weeks, we had the show on E. And it really set up E for what they're doing. I mean, it went in at 10 o'clock on Sunday nights and really sort of began that celeb reality kind of thing that they do, and that we are now continuing with our friend Ryan Seacrest with the Kardashian shows. So in a way, moving the show, I should thank Peter Liguri, because by moving it to E, it created a whole new business for us. So thank you, Peter.
Do you think that at the end of the run that Paris and Nicole left the show as better young women? Did they take anything from it, or do you think not so much?
I actually think Paris and Nicole probably learned a lot from the show. I think they developed a real work ethic. You see it in Paris, the way she works on all of her businesses. And I think you see it now with Nicole Richie with her businesses. I think ultimately Nicole decided that she really didn't want to have her personal life on camera, which I respect. She did her 5 years, and when it came to an end, I think she was sort of relieved. And, she got married shortly thereafter, now has some kids. She has her businesses, and she's doing very well. Paris still wanted to continue to do things and went on to do some other series at MTV and then at Oxygen.
You won another Emmy for Autism the Musical. What was that?
Well, at some point, we all looked at ourselves here, and a number of us, including Sasha Alpert, who heads up our casting efforts, we realized we all have a love of documentaries. And we said, we have this big building, and we have all these edit rooms, and we have business affairs, and we have a music department. Why aren't we doing documentaries? Why aren't, we could certainly, if we could just, they're not probably we're not going to make much money doing documentaries, but there are stories that we would like to tell that aren't suitable for a reality show and that aren't going to get on Fox or MTV. So we sort of set out with a game plan. This was about 5 or 6 years ago, and basically said, let's do a documentary every year and a half, and let's basically let the young documentary filmmaking community know that we're interested in doing documentaries. And so we started taking pitches from people, and basically the way most documentaries get made is someone has an idea or access to something, they shoot some film, they put a trailer together, and then they go out and try and get funding for it. So rather than us trying to come up with the ideas for the documentaries, we said, let's let the people with the passion for that subject come in. And if we share that passion, then let's help them get the thing made. Let's finance it and get it distributed. And so that's what we did. And the first one was Autism the Musical, which came in because Sasha Alpert had a friend who had an autistic kid. And was aware that this woman was trying to put together this film, and so we met with them. They had shot, some material, but they needed the money to get the thing made and then edited and distributed, and so we stepped in and played a big role in getting the film made. And it's an interesting process because you're sort of mixing reality people with documentary people. And, documentary people often they shoot and they shoot and they shoot and they go and they edit some and then they shoot some more. And to me, it's a very undisciplined process. We're going to find the story in the edit room and it goes on for weeks and weeks and weeks. Whereas when I'm making a reality show, everything's like, we got delivery dates. We got 22 episodes to get on the air, and we've got budget pressures and all of that. So in a way, the documentary people that have come in here have been given sort of more resources than they're used to. But at the same time, they've also been pushed to sort of figure out more of the story before they get in the edit room. And then as they start to come up with their rough cuts, we have myself and the head of post and some of the other people here will watch the rough cuts and give them feedback and suggestions. But ultimately, it's always going to be the documentarian's cut of the show. We want it to be their production. It has to be because it started with them, it's their passion. But at the same time, we want it to be commercially successful. And so there's an interesting tension. But so far it's been a very positive tension. And, with the first one right out of the gate, won a couple Emmy Awards.
And you've continued doing occasionally?
Yeah, we've continued to do them. We did, there's one now out called Billionaire, which is about one of the founders of DHL who ended up dying under strange circumstances, and ultimately it was discovered that he had a bunch of children around that he had not specifically disinherited in his will. And there was a huge inheritance fight between these children, who are mostly the sons and daughters of prostitutes around the Pacific Rim, and the University of California, who he had left all his money to. There was $1 billion at stake, and it was a David and Goliath fight between the Guam lawyer who was representing all these kids and the University of California. And it's a great story. And And then we have one we're shooting right now, which is about the murder of a little boy in Oxnard. One little boy who was 14 shot another boy, 13, in his English class because he was gay. And there's just been a big trial, and we're pretty much just finishing up production, and we'll start editing shortly.
And this will air on television, or is this?
When we basically go into these with the idea that it will either go the theatrical route or it will go the television route. We're never quite sure which. For television, there's basically HBO, and there's the Oprah Winfrey Network that's doing some docs, Showtime occasionally, Sundance Channel maybe, IFC maybe. There's not a lot of places for documentaries on American television. I would love to see a documentary channel, quite honestly, because I think it's a great form of storytelling, and it's hard to find it. I guess certainly with Netflix and with the digital world, I think it's going to be we may not need that channel because it essentially may exist through Netflix or through digital.
Right. What was the idea behind the Bad Girls Club?
The Bad Girls Club. The Bad Girls Club came about as Starting Over was coming to an end. Part of it was that I had a whole bunch of great people who worked on Starting Over who were going to lose their jobs. And so I felt pressure to find something for them to do. And I had noticed that the most interesting characters on Starting Over, or the most interesting characters on The Real World, were the bad girls. There was just something so compelling about them. And so we put together a little piece of tape where it was about 2.5 minutes, and it basically talked about bad girls, and it used examples from our various shows of bad girls. And it talked about the fact that a bad girl can often get in her own way, and that sometimes, she loses potential careers or relationships because of that behavior. And, it's an interesting area. And if you put a group of bad girls together in seeing each other's behavior, almost holding a mirror to their behavior, would it affect that behavior? Would they change? Would they grow from the experience? And I only felt there was one place for the Bad Girls Club, and that was Oxygen. And so I went into Jerry Laybourne and basically pitched her the show, showed her the tape, and she said to me, well, how do we do this? Like, do we make a pilot? And I said, no, it's really hard to make a pilot because you're not going to see the potential of the show in a pilot. You really just sort of have to commit to the series. Sometimes we do a step deal where we'll do the casting, and then if you approve the casting, we go forward with the series. And she said, well, how many episodes do you think we should do? And I said, well, I think we should do 22. And she said, that's good. And so she bought 22 episodes in the room. It was the best sale I ever did. And she was an amazing partner on the show. And about 1.5 years later, she used the success of the Bad Girls Club to help sell her network to NBC. And it really branded that network. And I think as a producer, one of the things you try to do is you help either reinforce a brand or create a brand with your show. And I think we've seen how The Real World helped brand MTV. The Bad Girls Club has certainly branded Oxygen, and I think The Simple Life and then the Kardashians have branded E!
And the Bad Girls Club is still in production, right? Still.
Bad Girls Club, that little show that first started to try and save a few jobs, is now about to. In fact, next week I have final casting for season 8. And it's also spun off into Love Games, Bad Girls Need Love Too, and that's currently airing its 3rd season. One of the things as a producer you try to do is not only you try to get new shows on the air, you try to keep your current shows on the air, and you also try to spin off of those shows, because it's a lot easier to keep a current show on the air than to put a new show on the air, and it's a lot easier to get a network to pick up a spin-off than a brand new concept. So, we've had quite a lot of spinning off, starting with Road Rules, and then the Challenge on MTV, the Real World Roaders Challenge, and then Love Games with Oxygen, and of course with the Kardashians, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, we have the spin-offs, Kourtney and Khloe in Miami, Kim and Kourtney in New York, Lamar and Khloe and Lamar. I mean, we have this next week. I think Kendall is having her Sweet 16 special. So anyway, a big believer in keeping shows on the air and trying to spin off new shows from existing shows.
So how did you get involved with the Kardashians, Keeping Up with the Kardashians? This is a family that there's no middle ground. They either love them or hate them.
Yeah,
but
luckily
they certainly get attention.
Yeah, luckily most people seem to love them. And it's sort of amazing that I was at my alma mater, University of Missouri, for a journalism thing, and I was amazed that some of the professors were like following the Kardashians. It's a lot of people love it. It's an escape. It's like I deal with all this stuff. I just want to watch this fun, crazy family. And what makes the Kardashians so great is that they are a family, and they do love each other, and they may get in arguments with each other. They may do crazy things to each other, but ultimately they always come back together. And I think that's what gives it the heart that a show, for instance, like Real Housewives of Beverly Hills doesn't have. That show doesn't have a heart, whereas the Kardashians does. So how do we get involved with the Kardashians? What happened was my old friend Lisa Berger had a deal with Ryan Seacrest, and he brought Kim Kardashian in about doing a show. And they had shot some tape with the family, and there was a feeling that some kind of a show involving the family would be interesting for E. And so I think it was like on a Friday we got a call from Lisa saying, we want to do this show. We think you should partner with Ryan on it. And so over the weekend, basically I was actually in Florida, and they put the little tape that Ryan had shot, which was 7 or 8 minutes, up on our server so I could watch it. And I said, oh my God, this is great. It's like a real-life sitcom. You've got the conservative dad, you've got the 3 gorgeous sisters, you've got the meddling mom. I mean, it's all here. And so I said, yes, we should do this. And so Gil Goldshine, our president of our company, who was then head of business affairs, worked with E. They hammered a deal together over the weekend, and on Monday we started pre-production. And it's been an amazing experience. The family is incredible to work with. They are incredibly trusting of us, and the reason the show is so good, I think, is because they let the cameras roll on everything. They don't stop us.
Did you anticipate the degree of popularity that the show and the family and the girls would have?
I don't think anyone anticipated the success of the Kardashians. I mean, it went on the air and it got decent ratings, but it wasn't an overnight hit. It really sort of broke through probably in the second season.
What is it about the Kardashians that people love?
I think the thing that people love about the Kardashians is that they are first and foremost a loving family. Second, they live a fabulous life, and quite honestly, with the economy the way it is, it's sort of fun to watch people who have nice cars and nice houses. But most importantly, they are wonderful television characters. I mean, if you were writing a family sitcom, writing basically the Kardashians wouldn't be a bad place to start, because you've got the conservative dad, you've got the meddling mom, you've got the 3 beautiful sisters, each who have their own distinct attributes. You've got 2 younger sisters. It's all there.
Do they have final approval, or who does?
We always, well, Chris Jenner is an executive producer on the show, so she always sees the episodes. She could certainly speak up if she had a problem with something, but they haven't had a problem with anything. And again, it's about understanding, sort of the talent understanding what you're going out to do with the show. One of the most important things you can do as a producer is to make sure everybody understands what we're making. You want to make sure that the show that you're making is the same show that the talent understands we're making, and most importantly, that the network knows it's that show. Because what you don't want to do is deliver your first cut and the network goes, oh, this is too soft. I need more bitchiness, or I need people fighting. And you didn't shoot bitchy and people fighting. And, it's hard to make something out of nothing, or potentially worse, you shoot the show and there is a lot of bitching and fighting, but that's not what you told the family that it's going to be about, and the network ultimately decides, no, we need more bitching and fighting, and then you put together the bitching fighting version of the show and you show it to the family and they freak out and go, this isn't what we signed up for. So you have to be really clear with everybody at the beginning of a project so that everyone is on the same sort of need-to-know information as far as what we're making. And if you do that, you won't have problems.
Is there anything that's off limits in terms of what you shoot within reason?
No, with the Kardashians, the only thing that, when we went into it, we said, we're not interested in following you into the shower or into, the bathroom. We're not interested in, seeing Bruce and Chris have sex with each other. So there's a little bit, certainly more so than the Real World, which is essentially a 24/7 kind of observational documentary. This, the family knows when we're going to be shooting. And at the beginning of every season, we sit down with them and we talk about what's going on in their lives. And we say, oh, yeah, Bruce is thinking of getting corrective facial surgery because he had a bad, experience many years ago. And we say, yeah, that's something we'd love to tell. So we sort of sit down at the beginning of the season and figure out what's going on in their lives, what we want to focus on. But then again, the great thing about the Kardashians is while we're shooting that, stuff happens. We're shooting Khloe and Lamar, and all of a sudden, 2 days ago, Lamar gets traded. We're rolling. So this has happened time and again where we happen to be rolling and stuff happens. We're rolling and Kim falls in love and decides she's going to get married. Or we're rolling and Khloe walks in and says, I want to marry Lamar in 9 days. So it's good and it's fresh and it's exciting to watch because it's unpredictable and because the family essentially has given us complete carte blanche to shoot anything.
And speaking of the Kim and Chris marriage, there's been criticism that it was a publicity stunt among certain quarters. You've been in the middle of it. Can you comment on that? Or?
Yeah, I think it was not a publicity stunt. I think Kim fell head over heels in love with Chris, and he fell in love with her. But it didn't work out. But I certainly never heard or never saw anything that would lead me to believe that it was nothing but basically two people who probably didn't think it through enough and probably maybe rushed into it a little too quickly.
How did you get involved with Project Runway?
Project Runway, first of all, is one of the most sort of perfect little formats out there. I had always been an admirer of the show and, certainly thought that the Magical Elves who produced it did an amazing job with it. And what happened is when Harvey Weinstein sold it to Lifetime, NBC basically made the Magical Elves an offer they couldn't refuse because they didn't want them going with the show. And so there was a vacuum. They needed, Weinstein and Lifetime needed producers to make the show. And so Andrea Wong, who was then the head of Lifetime and an old friend, because we had produced Making the Band for her and a couple other reality shows for her. She basically called me up and said, John, I can't think of anybody I'd rather make this with. I think you'd do a great job with it, and we'd love you to do it. And so we did. And, it's the first time that I've ever taken over a show that wasn't essentially that I wasn't there at the beginning. So that's a unique challenge. And I remember my agent, Mark Itkin, saying, if this doesn't work out, you're going to get the blame, nobody else. And I said, yeah, that's true. I said, but I think it's a risk worth taking because it's a great show. And, we've done some pilots for Lifetime, but we've never had a series on their air. And I'd love to have Andrea Wong owing me something. I'd love to be able to, use this as a way, hopefully, to create more business with them. And so we took on the challenge, and that first season was incredibly challenging for us because of the scheduling. Lifetime needed the show on the air by a certain point, and the only way we could do it, because Heidi's kids were in school, was to make the show in L.A., and that meant that Michael and Nina could not be there for every episode. So we had to constantly be getting guest judges, and so it was challenging. And I don't think any of us anticipated that the New York press, in particular the fashion press, would be so against the idea that you could do a fashion show in L.A. There really is this feeling that you can only do a fashion show in New York, that is where fashion, the center of it is. Right, even though if you look at the history, a lot of it actually started with the movie business out in L.A. So we did that first season, and it actually did really well, though it certainly wasn't well received by some of the critics because, again, it was in L.A. and Michael and Nina weren't able to be on every show. And so then then it moved to New York, because then we could then shoot it in the summer when Heidi was available to be in New York with her kids, and that's what we've done with seasons 7 and 8, and those seasons have been very well received, and we've been nominated for Emmys for both those seasons.
And of course, you're referring to Heidi Klum. Were you a fan of the show, and when you came on board, did you think it could be improved upon?
I was a tremendous fan of Project Runway. I just think it's a great format, and I thought that it is brilliantly cast. Heidi Klum is just fascinating as the host. She's smart, she's articulate, she's funny, she's critical. It's just so much fun to watch her because you're never quite sure what she's going to do. And Michael Kors, you couldn't find a better judge. I feel like the Emmy should have a category for judges because he's been robbed. Nina Garcia, amazing, her perspective and her chemistry with Michael and Heidi. And then Tim Gunn. He essentially created the idea of a mentor on these shows. He was incredibly helpful to us when we took over the show because, it didn't come with a Bible. It didn't come with a how-to book. And so we sort of had to figure a lot of it out. And Tim was very, very giving in sharing with us sort of how to get this show made. And he is certainly, the heart of the show.
What do you feel like your main contribution has been since you've come on board?
It took us that first season to start figuring out the show. What I think we've done is we were able to take sort of a look at the show, a fresh look at the show. And there were just some small things that bugged me about the show. They used to make more of a deal of the model selection. Often the show would begin, the first thing you would see would be Heidi it's a new episode and there's a new challenge, and first we have to select our models. And I'm going, well, it's really not about the models. And so we've taken that out of the show. At first, we put it in its own show called Models of the Runway. We just moved it to a separate show because Harvey had sold a spin-off called Models of the Runway. And then when that went away, we just got rid of that because we wanted to put the focus on the designers. So we got rid of that little clunky thing of having to select models. The next thing we did was there were some times on the show where I felt like I wanted to flash back to the design. For instance, when we're at the very end of the show, when Heidi is addressing the different people who, may be sent home or may win the challenge, I wanted to flash back to their design on the runway because I can't sometimes remember who had which design. And so we put that little piece in. And then the big reinvention for us came when Lifetime said, let's make the show 90 minutes. And when we made the show 90 minutes, it really allowed us to look at everything. And one of the things we were able to do was we were able to add some additions like a steady cam to follow the models around the scrim, which I think gives it an energy, and to follow them on the runway. We do that in the pre-tape of the runway before the judges are there. We also were able to be more behind the scenes in the designer lounge and chronicle more of that sort of what's going on in there while the judges are talking to the three top and bottom people or while the deliberations are going on. So it really allowed us to open up the show more, and I think as a result you get to know the designers a little better. So those are and I think we cleaned up the set a little. The set needed some freshening up, and so we did that.
How involved are you in the casting?
I'm always involved in casting because I think casting is critical to every show we do. So, there is a permanent casting department here at Bunim/Murray headed up by Sasha Alpert, and she has a casting director who does Project Runway. And, I probably join the process when we're down to maybe 35 potential designers and, watch their tapes and look at their sort of resumes, and we have a fashion consultant who looks at their fashion. And so, and then we take what our recommendation is to the Weinstein Company and then to Lifetime. And the Weinstein Company and Lifetime have been very collaborative in the process of choosing the cast, and it's been a great experience. One other little thing we did this season that was just on, was we actually began the show with 20 designers coming to New York, and they actually met with Heidi, Michael, Tim, and Nina and presented themselves, and then they chose the 16 that were going to go forward, which in a way invested them in a way that they hadn't been invested before, because previously only Tim met them before they showed up in New York, and now all four of those. And, it was a big Anya, this young woman who ultimately went on to win the season. When she presented herself, it was quickly discovered that she hadn't been sewing for very long, and they looked at her stuff and they said, "Did you really sew these?" Because they just couldn't believe that she sewed the stuff. And Michael and Nina didn't want her on the show, and Heidi insisted she should be on the show, and then that played out all through the season, sort of Heidi's investment in her, and Heidi had stuck her neck out for her, and ultimately she ended up winning, and she could sew.
How long does it take to shoot one episode? Is it done just in a very short turnaround?
Project Runway, the episodes are either shot over 3 days or 2 days, depending on the specific episode. So they are what we call 2-day challenges and 1-day challenges, and then there's the day where they get judged. So 2 or 3 days, depending on the episode. So we have about a 5-week production period to make the 12 episodes before taking a hiatus while the designers go off and create their final collection, and they return in September for Fashion Week, and then we shoot our final 2 episodes.
Who comes up with the with the challenges?
We have a group of producers who come up with ideas for challenges. And sometimes Heidi will come up with one. We had one this season where Heidi wanted to do an outdoor runway, and she wanted to be bigger in life, so she said, let's put the models on stilts. So they're going to have to create these enormous outfits that will work on models with stilts.
Any behind-the-scenes secrets you can tell us, or what would surprise us about that show?
You know, I think people would be sort of shocked at sort of where we make it. Parsons, you know, we're making it at a fashion school. The show has always been made there, except for the LA season, and so you know, we basically take over part of the school and we turn it into production offices and interview rooms and a makeup and hair room for Heidi, and we're using their stage. And I think part of why the show is so good is that, you know, Tim Gunn used to be a Parsons professor, and he initially was going to be, quote, a technical advisor on the show, but ultimately became the mentor. You know, I think a lot of what makes that show good is the fact that it's so real, and it was so, you know, it's set in this place called Parsons. You know, I think as far as secrets, there aren't a lot of secrets to it. I do think... you know, Tim Gunn is incredibly dedicated to the show, and he really takes these designers under his wing, and he helps them through not only the professional part of the journey, but also the emotional part of the journey. He's very nurturing and very caring for them, and wants to see them through safely. You know, I think that may be surprising to the audience, that there are so many people who care, and whether it's the camera people, the audio people, everybody wants the best for these folks, and is thrilled when that person finally wins.
Is there any coaching or instructions given to the judges just to help them be better for TV?
Well, I came in, you know, in season 6, so the judges already knew what they were doing by season 6. The one thing we've done a little bit is we've really... there used to be a little more consulting with the judges about their decisions, and we've really freed the judges to make their decisions. And we want them to argue it out and them to come to a decision. We don't want to come in and try and help them to make the decision. We really want to encourage them to wrestle with each other over it. And I think, you know, viewers have seen over the last few seasons a lot more passion on the part of the judges, because we've empowered them to really take it and run with it.
Do you have a favorite winner, or anybody that really stands out in your mind?
You know, that's like asking someone of their favorite child. No, I'm really happy for, you know, each person who's won, and you know, with Runway, I think it's very true that it's not just the winner who wins. I think all of the people who are on the show usually advance their careers.
I was going to ask about that. Has the industry been like the public with American Idol? You know, some of them they embrace, some of them kind of, you know, fall to the wayside. But has the industry been pretty responsive to the winners overall?
You know, I think that Project Runway has been amazing for the fashion industry. It's really sort of put it in the spotlight, and you know, the each season when we go to Fashion Week, that show that we do with the finalists is always one of the most sought-after tickets. So I think there's a respect for the show in the fashion industry. I think there's a respect for the challenges that we put these people through, because quite honestly, if you talk to a lot of fashion designers, they can't sew anymore. So they're pretty impressed with what these people do. And so I think, you know, and a lot of the people who are on the show go on to very successful careers in the industry. They may not, you know, be as well known as Diane von Furstenberg, but they're having their own success.
Okay.